Thank you for joining us once again as we focus on development issues in Mother Africa. On the show this week, we host UNDP Administrator and former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Helen Clark. We get your views on the issues. And as always, we have Africa's Top 10. I'm Julie Gishuru, and you're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. This week on the show, we host Helen Clark, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, currently handling the docket of UNDP as administrator.
Helen Clark became the administrator of the United Nations Development Programme on 17th of April 2009 and is the first woman to lead the organization. She's also the chair of the United Nations Development Group, a committee consisting of the heads of all UN funds, programs and departments working on development issues. Prior to her appointment with UNDP, Helen Clark served for 9 years as Prime Minister of New Zealand, serving 3 successive terms from 1999 to 2008. Throughout her tenure as Prime Minister, Helen Clark engaged widely in policy development and advocacy across the international, economic, social and cultural spheres. Under her leadership, New Zealand achieved significant economic growth, low levels of unemployment and high levels of investment in education and health and in the well-being of families and older citizens. Helen Clark taught in the Political Studies Department of the University of Auckland. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in 1971 and a Master's with First-Class Honours in 1974.
Let's get straight to her views on the issues. Thank you so much for making time for the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Thank you.
Now, Africa is a remarkable continent, very diverse, vast, in terms of nation states, fairly young, dealing with quite a number of challenges. If you look at Africa when it comes to development, what are your thoughts on where the continent is currently?
Well, I think that there's many stories in Africa. There's some tremendous success stories. And if you look at examples like Rwanda, which just over 2 decades ago was on its knees from genocide. It doesn't get worse than genocide. Look at it today, a very good achiever on the Millennium Development Goals, really a transformed country. Ethiopia too went through a very, very bleak period of civil war and famine. Ethiopia today is a confident country striding towards being an emerging economy. Of course there's challenges, but these are development success stories. On the other hand, we see the countries which have fought themselves to a standstill. We're looking at the agony of South Sudan today. We're looking at Central African Republic coming back on the long road from where it went to with the terrible violence of recent years. Mali is trying to come back from secession, military coup, ongoing terrorism. So we have many, many stories, and the aim in development is to have every story as a good story so the people benefit.
So, you know, it's fascinating when I look at your story in particular, and you know, you were an academic for a while, you then went into the political sphere, and now you're in the development world. When it comes to the challenge of leadership, and you look at this continent, what would you advise African presidents? If you were sitting in a room and they said, you know, Helen, what would you say to us in this dynamic world? What must we do to ensure we really get the best out of our continent? What would you say?
Well, firstly, I say roll your sleeves up, because being successful in winning an election isn't the end point of it all. You have a manifesto, you have a plan, you have dreams. You've got to make those happen. So you must appoint competent people around you, and you must hold them to account. Don't just stand back and say, oh, that's their job and I'll travel the world. No, you must be focused on what it was that you told your people you would do, have some real benchmarks and aim to meet them. Do everything in your power to use this incredible privilege of leadership which you have to make a difference for your people.
It's very interesting when, you know, rolling the sleeves up and getting it done, and that is the challenge we face. Africa seems to know what needs to be done. It's always taking the next step. So I want to talk now a little bit about partnerships and the different stakeholders who can support the continent, UNDP being one of the key stakeholders. How do we achieve is the word symbiosis. How do we ensure that partners and stakeholders are working together to add value to the roles that each play? How do we achieve common purpose?
Well, I think that's helped first by governments being very clear on what their development journey is. Where the government's clear, the partners know where they can add value to the process. I very strongly believe that countries can make their luck. You know, we're not all born lucky. We're not all born with big natural resource endowments or everything going for us, but we can make our luck. And so if I were in a leadership position here, as in my own country, I'd be looking at what's going to help my country to succeed. What are the things I have to do that will unlock the gates that are standing in the way at the moment? Most definitely rule of law is important. If you're going to expect your own citizens and others to invest in your country, they want to know that they're going to be properly treated under the law for their investment. Enabling environment, good regulation, good policy is very, very important. So if the government's clear on that, if it enables that, if it has a clear national plan, the partners will come in. The investors will come in. You'll inspire your own people because they'll see how they can leverage from that certainty and confidence which a government portrays.
Such a powerful message. It applies to countries, it applies at individual level as well. We may not all be born lucky, but we can make our luck. Sit on that one. Think about that one for a bit. Let's come now to the role of UNDP on the continent. How do you prioritize your engagement with African governments in terms of the issues that you are actually dealing with?
Well, I see UNDP as a catalyst. You know, UNDP is a large global organisation, and somewhere up towards $5 billion goes through its books every year. But of course, if you averaged out $5 billion across all the citizens of developing countries, it's nothing. So we have to be very smart in the way out we spend our money. And I think our role is to catalyse development, to be there, to work alongside governments and countries, to add value, innovate, bring ideas, bring innovation, bring what you've learnt from elsewhere in the world to put on offer to countries. Every development situation is unique. I think our huge asset is that we operate country by country. Yes, we're a global organisation, but we say no cookie cutter approach, no one size fits all. What are the circumstances here? Know the society. We depend very much on the insights of our national staff because overwhelmingly our staff are citizens of the countries where the office is. And then look at how we can work alongside people to achieve their dreams. So we're a catalyser.
That's interesting. No cookie cutter approach, which is absolutely critical. Before we come at looking at the UN system, I want to go to the fact that I read somewhere that Nelson Mandela was a hero for you. And I want to pose the question, as Africans look at our leaders, very often we feel disappointed. We feel they don't carry our hopes and our visions. They maybe are challenged in many different respects. What would you say are the traits of Mandela that leaders across the continent should embody and hold up?
Well, courage, I think. What incredible courage to survive Robben Island, which was supposed to break down every part of you, physically, mentally, your resilience. To walk out of there with your head hurled high on your own terms, and then to negotiate with representatives of the regime which had imprisoned you and repressed your people. This takes a quality of greatness that is not to be found everywhere. So the first movement I got involved in as a young person was the anti-apartheid movement in New Zealand. And of course, Mandela was a hero. He was a hero whose words we never heard spoken because he was in jail. But we knew about the freedom trials. We knew about the ringing declaration he made there, that this was a cause he had believed in all his life, and if necessary, was a cause he was prepared to die for. What incredible motivation that provided to us thousands of miles away to do whatever we could. So I would say to leaders, look to Mandela and the courage. I remember when Mr. Mandela came to New Zealand as president in 1995 for a Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and a very old friend of mine said to him, Mr. Mandela, how do you feel coming here and meeting people, yes, who supported you, but others who never said anything? All those years you were in jail and they were in positions of responsibility. And he replied to her, you know, my dear, in my very long life, I have learned that it is important to forgive but never forget.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
You know, the courage to resist when you need to resist, the courage to forgive
when you have to forgive.
But don't forget.
Don't forget.
But don't forget. Very powerful. Let's go now to the UN system. And there have been a lot of stakeholders, leaders, including President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya and others who have said, you know what, we need a complete transformation, we need a shift. Some of the issues raised are level playing field. You know, we need to create that. Other issues raised are, along the lines of bureaucracy. It's just too much. Priorities may not be quite right. Helen, what are your thoughts? Does the UN need to transform?
Oh, yes, it does. And of course, the UN also has many parts. I mean, UNDP is an autonomous fund and program with its own board of member states. And we have undergone a substantial organisational transformation. But in this big beast called the UN Secretariat, with its big departments, including for peacekeeping, it definitely needs transformation. There are very serious questions being raised about some of the ethics standards and behaviour. You know, one of the reasons I put myself forward as Secretary General is I believe, having reformed an organisation like UNDP, having led a country successfully with many reforms, I've got skills I could bring to this task at the United Nations. It's a very siloed organisation. And yet, how will we ever deal with problems like combating violent extremism if we put peacekeeping there, security there, politics there, development there? We need joined up strategies. We need top leaders across the UN system who are going to collaborate, work with each other, not the institutional rivalries that really sometimes cripple the place. The bureaucracy is really quite troubling. We have great people, but if they're crippled by systems that don't operate very smoothly, they get frustrated. So there is a lot to do.
So just paint a picture for us. If you were selected to head the UN, what kind of a UN would we be looking at a few years from now?
Well, I would certainly hope a lot more women in the top positions because we're quite a lonely small group, actually. Almost reminds me of when I went into the New Zealand Parliament in 1981. The numbers of women doubled from 4 to 8 out of 92.
Wow.
I mean, it was hopeless, really. I mean, it's a third today, but it took a long time to get there.
It's taken decades.
Yeah, and this was the first country in the world where women fought for and won the right to vote in 1893. So definitely the UN staff at senior levels as well as lower levels needs to look more like the family of nations. It needs to look more gender balanced. It needs a much better representation across member states because there's a feeling that there's a little too much concentration in some quarters. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think I can bring the perspective of leadership. In the past, when a Secretary General's been selected, it hasn't been a leader type profile that's been looked for. It's been a diplomatic profile because, of interstate relations. But in all honesty, when you look at the mess the world is in and the many challenges, it's going to take leadership to dig out of this. And I think the profile of someone like myself, who's been a national leader, who's been a leader in the UN system, who can pick up the phone, can ring presidents, ring ministers, get things done, knows global civil society. You need someone, again, to roll up those sleeves and really try to bring people together to make common cause around the issues. We've got great agendas for development, sustainable development goals, the Paris Climate Agreement, they've got to be implemented. I'm right across this. I've spent the last 7 years focusing on them. But I want to bring my perspectives on these issues now into the peace and security field because we're not going to solve the security issues only by security responses.
As a leader, if you made Secretary General, what would it mean for Africa specifically?
Well, firstly, I believe I can say I'm the only candidate offering who has had extensive partnerships with Africa. This actually does go back to the anti-apartheid movement of the 1960s and 70s. It goes to being New Zealand Prime Minister and having significant interaction with African leaders as a Commonwealth leader. And then this last 7 years, 4 months at UNDP, working with Africa, the biggest department of UNDP, travelling to an enormous number of countries to support our work, meeting so many leaders, ministers being involved in events, policy dialogues, doing everything I can to advance African development. I believe I really bring those strengths to hit the ground running as Secretary General.
Let's go to the gender issue, because in parts of the continent, it is a very prickly issue. There's this, the feeling from many of our patriarchal societies that, you're downplaying the men and overselling the women. There's a bit of a threat there that seems to be felt by the men. So for those who are skeptics, asking, why does this gender issue keep coming up and why is it a focal point? Let me ask this question. Why does the UNDP hold up the issue of gender equality as one of the critical issues when it comes to development matters?
Well, there's two issues. Firstly, it's the right thing to do. The right thing in any society is for people to have equal rights and opportunity. But beyond that, it's the smart thing to do. And this will be a point we make in the Human Development Report on Gender in Africa, which we're releasing here at TCAD in Nairobi, that if women are not equally empowered, educated, skilled, able to take advantage of opportunities in the economy and society, the whole country gets held back. Actually, families get held back, communities get held back because women aren't able to make their full contribution. So it's just smart for development to push the gender equality agenda. Now, I firmly believe that with more women's voices in decision making, that's in cabinets and in parliaments and in officialdom, you also see more of the human, the people issues getting priorities. Women know what it's like to have to struggle to put food on the table.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to move to the global scene now. And we're seeing a lot of fear developing in many countries with a candidate like Trump gaining a lot of mileage in the US. It seems to be fueled by fear. The Brexit in Europe. Again, fueled by fear, discomfort with the other. Is the world becoming more siloed, or are we opening up? And what would you want to see globally?
Well, I think a number of the current political trends we see in the West are coming out of spillover effects from underdevelopment and poverty on the border and war and conflict on other borders. So would Brexit have happened if there hadn't been all the spillovers from the Syria crisis that led to the refugee crisis last year in Europe, which led to various political pushback against the other, as you say. Right. So we have to look at things very holistically here and find ways, firstly, of dealing with the conflicts so they don't spill on and on and on and have this global impact. And also getting people to see that our common interest is that no one is suffering from underdevelopment and poverty and war and conflict. Because in the end, if we let that fester, it will affect us and our interests. So we all have an interest in peace and prosperity for people.
And there's a lot of work to be done.
There's a lot of work to be done. Now, there's an old saying, if my neighbour is poor, I am poor too. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the migration largely fueled by underdevelopment and poverty up out of sub-Saharan Africa through to Europe. Europe is almost a stone's throw from Africa. Right. So if Africa is poor, it's going to affect Europe. So Europe has a stake in the continent's development. I come from a little country in the South Pacific, a developed country. We have a stake in the prosperity of the South Pacific. Right. So that's where most of our development emphasis goes. So let's think about our neighbour, would be my cry. Wow.
As we close, let's talk about the youth. Young people are growing up in a highly dynamic, very challenging world. In many ways, it's borderless because of the digital realities, but each nation faces its own challenges that they have to deal with. What would you advise a generation that we describe as the microwave generation? You want things now, you want things today, you see the way the world operates, and yet you might have constraints in your own environment. What advice would you give young people?
Well, I think young people need to get involved, not just stand back and throw stones. I remember going to one country which had gone through a profound upheaval in recent years. In fact, I go to many, but I remember this conversation with youth. And the youth was so critical, even though the old regime had been thrown out. They said, everybody's corrupt, the whole system's corrupt. I said, look, If you stand around and just say everything's bad, other people are going to move into the space and you won't be heard at all.
Right.
You have to channel your energy, activity and advocacy into the political structures that are emerging. Otherwise, you won't have voice. So I really do encourage youth to speak up, get involved, make their voices known, stand for office, really, be very engaged citizens. And I say to older generations, a lot of societies don't listen to young people. They listen to old people. They've got to listen to young people. There's so many societies on this continent where somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of people are under the age of 26.
Right.
You ignore those young people at your peril. But if you engage them, they're such a huge asset for your society.
Oh, so the message to you as young people, get involved, get in there, do something, and be strategic about it. I'm going to ask you to look into the camera as we close, Helen, please, and deliver a direct message to many millions of Africans who are watching. Everybody's trying to find a space and a way to contribute positively. Some people feel it's a hopeless cause. What would you say? How do we begin to all be part of the change?
Well, every day is a new opportunity to do something for your country and to develop your own potential. What I would say to Africa is what incredible potential you have. A young, dynamic population, so many resources. So fix the things that are standing in the way of maximising that. And they're often pretty obvious. Fix the corruption, better institutions, open up space for people to have voice and be creative and innovative. I've got huge confidence in this continent. And if I was to live another 100 years, I know I'd come back. I wouldn't see the Africa of today. I'd see a very vibrant, innovative society which can offer its people universally a good deal. So let's work for that.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
I'm Helen Clark, UNDP Administrator, and you are watching Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Fascinating insights from Helen. Let's get to your views now.
This week we asked you, what are the key areas of opportunity to capitalize on for Africa's development? Evans Mutuku says, I think integration, innovation and collaboration will play a key role in ensuring development in Africa and will create employment opportunities.
My name is Gerald Nderitu. I'm watching African Leadership Dialogues from Nakuru. In order for Africa to fully reach its potential, the infrastructure has to be of the best pedigree to enhance free movement of goods and services.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
Time now for Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature countries with the best Human Development Index. The aim of the research was to determine whether a country is developed, developing, or underdeveloped in terms of Human Development Index. The Human Development Index (HDI) is a composite statistic of life expectancy, education, and income per capita indicators. This is according to the United Nations Development Programme's Human Development Report. Starting us off at number 10 is Morocco with an index of 0.628 and is ranked 126 globally. Coming in at number 9 is Cape Verde. The island nation located off the coast of West Africa garnered an index of 0.646 and is number 122 in the global listings. Positioned at number 8 is South Africa. The southernmost sovereign state in Africa is ranked 116 globally with an index of 0.666. Taking the number 7 spot is Gabon. Characterized by low population density, abundant petroleum and foreign private investment, Gabon attained an index of 0.684 and is number 110 in the global ranking. Slotted in at number 6 is Egypt. Considered the cradle of civilization, Egypt is ranked 108 in the global listing with an index of 0.690. At number 5 is Botswana with an index of 0.698 and is number 106 globally. Tunisia takes the number 4 spot. The northernmost country in Africa is ranked 96 globally with an index of 0.721. Anchored in at number 3 is Libya. The country in the Maghreb region of North Africa attained an index of 0.724 and is number 94 globally. Seychelles comes in at number 2 with an index of 0.774 and is ranked 64 in the global ranking. At number 1 this week is Mauritius. The volcanic island nation recorded an index of 0.777 and is ranked 63 in the global listing. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
As always, we end with words of incredible wisdom. Our African proverb this week goes, "A hunter who has only one arrow does not shoot with careless aim." Be strategic. Let's get it done. Blessings to you and blessings